What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Defenders Beyond, and Blue Marvel fights the Phoenix Force. Plus, we're also going to find out how the Beyonder ranks in comparison to the Phoenix. I'm curious to see how you guys respond. So, as we covered in the last video, basically Blue Marvel, the Defenders and them had come across the Beyonders, and we got what was in effect the new origin of the Beyonders in Marvel Comics. They were effectively created by the Celestials and given enough power to ensure they could destroy the Celestials if they needed to. And so what we ended up finding at the end of that story is that the Defenders passed through the Beyonders and into the next stage of existence, right, the higher planes as it was called, and into the White Hot Room. Now, this requires a bit of a discussion here. And this is one of the things I wanted to hold off until this video. So in Marvel Comics, a lot of you guys are aware of the Phoenix Force, even if you don't necessarily know the ins and outs of the Phoenix Force. The idea behind the Phoenix is that there is only one Phoenix Force throughout the entirety of the multiverse and even omniverse. But in Marvel Comics in recent years, they've used multiverse and omniverse interchangeably, so they more or less mean the same thing in Marvel Comics now. But the idea behind it is there's only ever one Phoenix Force, just like there's only one living tribunal. The idea behind the Phoenix, though, is that it represents the sum total of all life that has ever, currently does, and will ever exist throughout the multiverse. Now, we know just by nature of the history of Marvel Comics, not even including Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, that the multiverse does have an end date. It will end naturally at some point in time. So that's how Marvel creates a sort of cap to the power of the Phoenix. But when you're talking about a level of power that high, the cap on the Phoenix Force's powers is so astronomically up there, you might as well consider that it doesn't even exist, because there'd be very, very few instances where you would see the Phoenix Force go up against a level of power that it just cannot handle. The only real exception to this is when the Phoenix takes on a physical host. The perfect host was Jean Grey, right? That's why Jean Grey and the Phoenix are so synonymous. It has taken on the bodies of beings like Quentin Quire, or at least in an alternate reality it did. In an alternate reality, Franklin Richards became the Phoenix. Rachel Summers is a popular host for the Phoenix, but the Phoenix's ability to utilize those avatars is relative to what the avatar's bodies can handle. So it's like pouring water in a glass. If you pour too much, it's going to overflow. The overflow equivalent in Marvel Comics is that physical being dying, right? That's basically what that is. And so the White Hot Room is basically this place within the multiverse whereby the Phoenix Force resides. It's its home. And it's in the White Hot Room that the Phoenix Force is at the absolute peak of its power. And so one of the things to know is that as they pass into this place, they are in the White Hot Room. It's where the Phoenix is its most capable. You'll never find the Phoenix Force ever being more powerful than it is when it's in the White Hot Room. Now, the first person that we initially pick up with is Tigra, and Tigra doesn't fully understand what's going on here. Instead, they've all seemed to have kind of arrived in different locations, really within the White Hot Room, if there is such a thing. And the result is that Tigra initially communicates with the Phoenix, right? Literally, the Phoenix pops up and it says, "I am fire and life incarnate, and my wings beat thunder. I am the glory at the heart of all things, the roaring flame of mercy and terrible judgment. Beyond me, there is darkness, human, darkness without end. Do you understand?" Now, here's the thing to understand. There is a realm beyond the realm of the Phoenix, and that's something that I hope you guys are really picking up on here with what Al Ewing's doing. He's kind of building it in layers, right? He's like, there's the main Marvel Universe. Beyond the main Marvel Universe, there is the multiverse. Beyond the multiverse, there's the Beyondverse. Beyond the Beyondverse, there is the White Hot Room. Beyond the White Hot Room is a place that we will see at the end of this comic, and actually in the next comic as well. What's ironic about that is that if you have an eagle eye in Marvel Comics, really in the events leading up to Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, or really Secret Wars, you know what room we're talking about. It's a really, really cool place. It's a place that the Silver Surfer visited once, so it's a really awesome location. But the thing about this is we switch over to Adam Brashear. Now, Adam Brashear, in communicating with the Phoenix Force, is one of these cool things, because Adam kind of asks, where you have like this construction worker who's building things and working on stuff, Adam asked the question, is that being an avatar of you? Now, the reality of this is that Al Ewing is sort of building on an old story that was done back in the day, where basically Jean Grey had met Mistress Death in the form of a guy. Now, I want to say it was during Dark Phoenix. That's one of those eras of Marvel Comics where, as much as I love the X-Men, the memories do get a little murky, and so I can't necessarily recall. The location of the comic isn't overly important here. What is important is that when Jean Grey met Death, that Death was actually building these pillars in her own realm. And these pillars were basically the afterlife for every individual being who died. Now, that was Chris Claremont's depiction of the realm of death. It has different depictions depends based on who you're talking to. If you read a comic by Jim Starlin that features Thanos in the realm of Mistress Death, it'll be shown one way, right? So it really depends on who's drawing and writing and interpreting the story and so on and so forth. But the important thing here is that what the Phoenix says is the reason why this construction worker's building is because the job of the Phoenix is to always build. Now, that's true, and that's been a thing since Grant Morrison's Here Comes Tomorrow during his new X-Men run. The idea behind the Phoenix, by and large, right, while it does exist and it does have an incredible amount of power, when Grant Morrison initially introduced the quote-unquote core rule of the Phoenix, that it was very, very nebulous, right? It was just like, I exist to fix what's broken. Well, what the hell does that mean, Grant Morrison? Like, I mean, nobody knows what that, like, what does it mean to fix what's broken? Like, what if something's kind of broken a little bit, but not really, right? If a glass is cracked, do you take it to a person who's going to be able to, like, fix it? Or do you just say, you know what, we'll wait till it starts leaking water? Like, how does that work, right? I mean, how do you square that circle? And so the role behind the Phoenix is that it's always building basically new universes, new places where people can reside, where life can grow. So it's kind of the wellspring of all existence. And so Adam Brashear, ever the scientist, really has more questions than anything else. And the answers that he gets are just very, very nebulous and very ambiguous, right? He's literally like, he asks a question, so what does that make him, right? The construction worker, your creation, an aspect of your being. And the response of the construction worker is, I am as I am, Adam Brashear, and I'm working. There's always the new to build on the old, always the schedule to keep. And so his question is, so you're God or you're death? Am I getting warm at least? Like, give me some kind of an answer. And he doesn't really get one. But from here, we switch over to America Chavez. Now, America Chavez, of course, is also visited by the Phoenix. And as she's making her way through this kind of endless desert, the Phoenix literally tells her, you've lost what it was that made you unique. You can get it back, but it's going to be a very, very arduous task. Now, what the Phoenix is referring to here is that when America Chavez was initially introduced into Marvel Comics, she was a character that had the ability to jump through realities. That was her thing. Much like what you saw in Doctor Strange 2, Multiverse of Madness, a giant star would appear, she'd jump through it, that star was a portal, she'd end up somewhere else. Initially, it happened without her ability to control to a degree. As time progressed, she gained more control over it, and that allowed her to jump in and out of whatever reality she wanted to, so long as she was aware of where it was. And so as a result of that, it's really Al Ewing saying the ability for her to regain her powers does exist, and that will eventually happen. It'll just take a little bit before it does. At that point, we switch over to Loki and the Beyonder. Now, this is where things get really, really interesting here, and I'm really curious to see how you guys feel about this, right? The Beyonder versus the Phoenix. I'm curious to see what you guys think. So one of the first things the Beyonder does is he basically makes a food processor, because the Beyonder can just do virtually anything it wants to and just craft something out of nothing, right? It's just the nature of the Beyonder's power. He's as close as you get to God. But the funny thing about this is that when Loki asked the question, the Beyonder says, I made it when we landed. Forging the base quarks, that was the hard part, right? Basically, making it was the hard part. Do you want to blend anything? I find it's comforting in moments like this. And when Loki asks, moments like what? The response of the Beyonder, moments when I'm outclassed, silly. If you hadn't trapped me in a narrative arc, I'd never have come here. I mean, I'm omnipotent, of course, technically speaking, but against the pure Phoenix Force, actually inside the white-hot room, we're probably going to end up like Mr. Carrot here. So what Al Ewing is establishing is the Phoenix Force in its most pure form is more powerful than the Beyonder. Now, there's room to make this argument here. There's room to make this argument because remember, every single time anyone's ever gone up against the Beyonder, Rachel Summers when she was the Phoenix fighting the Beyonder in Secret Wars 2, when Cyclops was killed by God King Doom wielding the power of the Beyonders, when he had the Phoenix Force, or at least when Cyclops had the Phoenix Force, every time we've seen the Phoenix face off against the Beyonder, it's always been the Phoenix with a physical host. And the Phoenix's power is always diminished when it has a physical host because outside of Jean Grey, no one's been able to wield the full totality of the Phoenix and become the White Phoenix of the Crown in its most pure form. So Al Ewing is actually going with credible evidence here, right? Given the fact that the Phoenix Force is absolute power, life incarnate, it stands to reason you could make an argument the Phoenix could defeat the Beyonder. Now, some people will kind of like say, no, that's ridiculous, largely because it's just like the Beyonder is supposed to be like the most powerful being out there next to God. And if we're talking about the original Beyonder from Secret Wars 1 and 2, yes, but lest we forget, in the Fantastic Four stories that were done back in the day, that retcon happened. The Beyonder's power was reduced by about half. So that kind of begs the question in terms of a tried and true Beyonder, which is what this guy now is, would the Phoenix be able to defeat it? I'm not 100% sure. There's no definitive answer here because I don't think there's really any credible evidence to offer either way outside of some stuff the Phoenix has done, some stuff the Beyonder's done, comparing the two of them and coming to a conclusion. So here's what I want. The comic book YouTube community, not just the fans, anybody in the comic book YouTube community who wants to get into this, give me an answer, because I'm curious, right? I mean, I'm sure people are going to power scale, do a little bit of cooking of the books, but, you know, let me know, right? What do you think would actually happen here? Like, do you think the pure Phoenix Force could actually defeat the Beyonder, that it is more powerful than the Beyonder? I'm curious, right? Somebody give me some answers here, because honestly, I'm excited to see if anybody could figure it out. But the thing about this is that once this sort of statement is known, right? Once this thing is known, we basically jump back to, of course, the Phoenix sort of taunting Loki and the Beyonder a little bit. The Loki's kind of ignoring her more than anything else. And one of the things that Phoenix says is that that version of Loki has to be destroyed because it's a Loki out of time. Remember, that's one of the things that we covered, that leading up to Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars, Marvel had stories that were called The Last Days of whoever in the heck was in that story. In this instance, The Last Days of Loki, that Loki basically skipped over the entirety of Secret Wars, went through a portal, went back in time, and that's how he's here. But Loki is not actually supposed to be here right now. He's supposed to be dead. He was supposed to have been wiped away with everything, right, with the multiverse, and then be reborn as his current self. So it's one of those weird things. It's a little weird and a little murky and kind of wonky, but just understand this version of Loki is not supposed to exist. And so that's what the Phoenix is talking about here when it says you're supposed to be burned away, you're supposed to be gone. But switching over to this fight between Blue Marvel, Adam Brashear, and the Phoenix Force, the fight between the two is really, really intriguing here. And the reason why is because Al Ewing is building on this in the sense that, one, Al Ewing is probably the second most prolific writer of Adam Brashear outside of Kevin Grievous, who made him, right? For those of you guys who aren't really familiar with that, Kevin Grievous made Adam Brashear. And then Al Ewing wrote the Heroic Age story, I believe, where Adam Brashear fought Hyperion from a different universe. But after that, all of the appearances of Adam Brashear's character in Marvel Comics have all been written by Al Ewing. The Mighty Avengers, led by Luke Cage, was Al Ewing. The Ultimates, Al Ewing. This is all Al Ewing that's been writing his character. So he's pretty well versed in what he's capable of. The Phoenix Force, for all of its power and all of its bravado and all of its abilities, is a being made of positive matter. So there is room, albeit Al Ewing kind of fudging the numbers a little bit, there is room for Adam Brashear to either be comparable to the Phoenix Force, if only temporarily, or at least to negate its power, because it's antimatter versus positive matter. So again, it's interesting here. It's one of those ways where it's basically Blue Marvel kind of getting a power boost, or Adam Brashear getting a power boost, one that we hadn't normally seen before, because this will be referenced across the internet. People will say, well, there was that time when Adam Brashear went toe-to-toe against the Phoenix, and then somebody's going to come back and say, yeah, but this, and that person's going to come back and say, yeah, but that, and that's how it works on the internet. But it's just one of those interesting things, because in the midst of the fight between the two, you do have the Beyonder and Loki who show up, and the Beyonder throws a food processor at the Phoenix and hits her in the head, which is kind of weird. But it's one of those things where what it does is it offers a momentary reprieve, because it allows America Chavez, who's basically returned, to jump in and fight the Phoenix. Now remember, America Chavez has the Eternity Mask, which grants her power that's equal to whoever she's facing off against. That's not even an Al Ewing invention as far as I'm aware. This thing's been around for years and years and years in Marvel Comics. What it does is it allows everybody else the time they need to basically start trying to figure out a way out of there. And that's where you have Adam Brashear, who starts talking directly to the construction worker. And it's kind of a cool thing, because while the construction worker is doing all of this, Al Ewing does kind of hint to the idea that the construction worker is not associated with the Phoenix, that it's not necessarily directly with the Phoenix itself. And in fact, one of the things the construction worker says is, he says, this place is a place of balance between light and dark, compassion and severity, mercy and destruction. Your friends are acting out that balance. There's an argument for letting you all journey on, just as there's an argument for burning you to nothing. And so Adam asks, like, that's not a debate that I want to risk playing out. Do you have any advice, mysterious stranger? And this guy says, me? I just work here. You're the one leading Eternity's defenders. You're the one calling the plays. And so it's an interesting thing, because what this guy looks like is, again, he's not associated with the Phoenix Force, which is to say, he's not a part of the Phoenix. Now, there is a person in Marvel Comics recently that has been talking about balance. And if any of you guys have read the newer Thanos one-shot that came out that recently retold his origin, which we'll cover tomorrow, that Mistress Death says that Mistress Death is like, no, Thanos is acting out of balance, right? He's playing a balance, that kind of thing. So whether or not this is actually Mistress Death is just one of those things that's a mystery. But again, it is cool to see that there's this kind of figure out there that doesn't really have a direct relation to the Phoenix per se. So again, it's sort of fascinating here because in the midst of all this, you have Adam Brashear that comes to this realization that with somebody like Tigra, she's a lot more powerful than she initially appears. Now, here's the thing about Greer Nelson. One, I know most of you guys don't care about Greer, and that's fair. She sucks, she always has, and she's never been interesting. But the thing about her character is that she gained her powers, and she plays a role similar to T'Challa of the Black Panther mythos, where T'Challa is an avatar of the Panther goddess Bast. Tigra is an avatar of what is basically the Tiger Force, or the Tiger God, if you want to call it that. It all goes back to her origin, her professor named Tumulo, who basically turned out to be a guy that was involved with a whole bunch of magicians that worshipped like a tiger god. It's weird and it's wonky and it's Marvel Comics back in the day, and it's one of those stories that didn't really make a whole lot of sense. The important thing here is she's got a level of power that she didn't know she had and she's never tapped into before. And so in doing so, what it does is that by utilizing this power of the tiger god, she kind of communes with it, channels its abilities, and then goes on to the affront, basically attacking the Phoenix. Now, again, this is Al Ewing kind of offering this idea. The Phoenix Force is powerful, but it's not the most powerful being out there. Beyond that, what it's also saying is that, yeah, it's more powerful than the Beyonder, but there are gods out there that are more powerful than the Phoenix. What you're witnessing here over the course of this story is Al Ewing giving us a wholesale reshuffling of the Marvel cosmic landscape, of the power hierarchy. Because in years past, in Marvel Comics, right, in years past, what you had is you had the one above all, then you had the Beyonder, then you had the Molecule Man, then you had everybody else, right? The Living Tribunal and Eternity, and their powers fluctuated based on the situation and who was writing the stories, so on and so forth, right? Then you had the introduction of characters like the Marquis of Death, Clyde Wincham, which elevated him to a higher position. You had characters with caveats, so like Thanos with the Astral Regulator, or Thanos with the Heart of the Universe, or Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet, or whatever plot device Marvel wants to create so he can go on some crazy omnipotent scheme. But whatever the case is, like, you always had this kind of established hierarchy among the cosmic entities, the gods, so on and so forth. There's never been an instance where we've ever looked at a character like Bast or any earthly-based god and considered the possibility that they would be on par with something as astronomically powerful as the Phoenix. The Phoenix permeates the multiverse. Bast is just a being over there who sits in that chair and appears sometimes in Marvel Comics. And like, that's it. Right? So like this god, this goddess, this tiger god, kind of falls in the same vein. So it is interesting to see Al Ewing just reshuffling so much of this. What the purpose is, I'm not entirely sure. That's why stories like this can kind of go either way. Either this story is one where what's happening here is going to permeate throughout the entirety of the MCU. So they're making things a little more reasonable so the Marvel Cinematic Universe can match it. The alternative is Al Ewing's doing this because he wants to, and he can, right? Because it's Al Ewing, and I'll read anything this guy does, and it's awesome, right? So, I mean, again, it's just one of those funny and sort of wonky situations. But in the midst of this whole thing, while this fight's going on between basically the Phoenix and the Tiger God, again, it gives the Defenders the chance to move beyond the realm of the White Hot Room and into what's called the Abyss, the place beyond. Now, once they're here, they initially have no idea what's here. Everything's black and white. There's no real color here or anything. Everything's just sort of drained out, almost as if it's things that haven't necessarily come to fruition yet. But the funny thing is, when they start asking questions and saying, like, what in the world's going on here? Like, everything just feels so wrong in this place. A disembodied voice comes out of nowhere and says, of course it does. You all died by fire, and now you're in the abyss with me. But don't worry, even here, Glorian can make your dreams come true. Now, here's the thing about Glorian, right? For those of you guys who don't know anything about this guy is 8 kinds of broken. This guy's just like 8, and not even just physically. The level of power this guy has is nuts. He's the most powerful being in Marvel Comics that you've never heard of, because this guy draws his power from the Shaper of Worlds, and the Shaper of Worlds is literally a walking, talking cosmic cube. That's basically what this guy is. This guy can do anything. Now, in years past, he hasn't been a being that was on par with the Phoenix or more powerful than the Phoenix or even the Beyonders. But what it looks like Al Ewing is doing here is saying that in this place, right, the land of couldn't be, shouldn't be, which is exactly what the Abyss is, that Glorian is the most powerful man walking. And I'm curious to see what in the world comes out of this. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.